The house had always been quiet, but over the years, the silence had grown heavier, like dust settling on forgotten memories. Mara moved through its narrow hallways, as if she were walking through someone else's life. She was in her mid-30s now, but the last 5 years had aged her in ways that didn't show on her face. They lived in an old, wooden home at the edge of a small town, the kind of place that once felt warm and safe. Now, every floorboard creak felt like a reminder of something broken. She stopped by the window, looking out at the dim yard. Autumn leaves piled up against the fence, untouched. Elias usually cleared them, but he didn't bother anymore. He didn't bother with much these days. Mara pressed her hand to the cool glass and let herself breathe slowly. She could almost hear echoes of laughter from years ago, the soft excitement when they first painted the nursery, the hopeful dreams they shared about the future. But those memories felt far away now. 5 years ago, everything changed. They lost their child before they ever got a hold of him. It was a pain that entered the house like a ghost, settling into corners, sitting between them at the dinner table, whispering during sleepless nights. At first, Mara and Elias held each other tightly, terrified of drifting apart. But grief has a strange way of working, soft at first, then sharp. It carved distance between them, inch by inch, until they were living in the same house but different worlds. Mara tried to speak about the pain, but Elias shut down, locking parts of himself away that she could no longer reach. Now, she barely saw him. He left early, returned late, and even when he stood next to her, it felt like he wasn't really there. His eyes didn't meet hers. His voice held no warmth. Sometimes he didn't speak at all. Lately, something had shifted even more. He stayed out longer than usual, and when he came home, there was a strange coldness in his eyes, a distance deeper than before. He smelled like the outside air, as if he had been driving for hours with the windows open. His clothes carried a faint scent of metal and dust. When Mara asked where he had been, he simply said, "Working," even though she knew that wasn't true. One evening, she watched him from the kitchen doorway as he stood in their dim living room, staring at the empty armchair across from him. His shoulders were stiff, and his hands trembled slightly. He didn't look lost. He looked haunted. Mara felt a quiet ache move through her chest. She missed him. Not the man he had become, but the man he used to be, the one who smiled without effort and held her like she was the most important part of his world. Something was pulling him away from her, something she couldn't name. And the house, with all its old memories, seemed to feel the shift too. The air felt colder. The nights felt longer. Mara tightened her robe around herself and stepped back from the doorway. She didn't know what was happening to Elias, but she could sense it as clearly as the chill in the air. The evening started like any other, quiet, colorless, and slow. Mara sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea she no longer wanted. Outside, the sky was turning dark, and the house seemed to sink deeper into its own silence. Elias still wasn't home. She checked the clock again. Nearly 9 p.m. Lately, he came home later and later, as if he were avoiding the life waiting for him inside these walls. Mara tried not to think the worst, but her mind wandered anyway. Maybe he was tired of her. Maybe the grief had finally pulled him into a place she couldn't follow. Maybe he had found someone else, someone who didn't remind him of everything they had lost. She pushed the thought away. It hurt too much to imagine. Just as she stood to pour the cold tea down the sink, she heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Her breath caught. She wiped her hands on her sweater and tried to steady herself. Whatever mood Elias carried into the house these days usually dictated how the rest of the night went. The front door opened. Elias stepped inside, but he didn't look at her. He didn't say hello, or even sigh like he used to after long days. Instead, he walked past her, leaving the door slightly open as if he had forgotten how to act like someone who lived here. "Elias?" Mara asked softly. No answer. He dropped his keys on the table and rubbed his forehead. His shoulders were tense, and his eyes had that distant, troubled look again. But tonight felt different. He wasn't just tired. Something was on his mind. Something heavy. Mara tried again, her voice gentle. "Are you okay?" Slowly, Elias turned to face her. For a brief second, She thought she saw something like fear in his eyes, or maybe guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Mara, I need your help." Her heart stirred with a strange mix of hope and dread. It had been so long since he asked her for anything. "With what?" she asked. He hesitated, looking away. "I need to prepare a room." "A room?" she repeated, confused. "Yes." His voice was firm, almost urgent. "Tonight." He still wouldn't meet her eyes. He stood stiffly, like a man holding on to a secret that was about to break out of him. Mara tried to understand. "Elias, prepare it for who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he started walking toward the hallway, motioning for her to follow. His movements were restless, almost shaky. She could feel her fear rising, but she swallowed it down. Maybe this was a chance. Maybe preparing a room meant he wanted to rebuild something between them. As they walked, Mara noticed something else. Elias was humming under his breath. A soft tune, a familiar one. Her heart froze. It was the same lullaby he used to hum when they talked about the baby. He hadn't hummed it in 5 years. At the door of the spare room, he finally turned to her. His voice was flat but sure. "She arrives tomorrow." Mara felt the air leave her lungs. "Who?" she tried to ask. But Elias was already walking away, humming that same haunting lullaby, leaving her alone with a fear she couldn't yet name. The next day moved slowly, like time itself was afraid to reach evening. Mara tried to distract herself with chores, but nothing worked. Every time she passed the spare room, she felt a twist in her stomach. The room stayed closed, silent, waiting for whoever Elias said was arriving. The word "arrives" echoed in her mind over and over. Who was coming? Why didn't Elias explain? And why had he hummed that lullaby? As the sun dipped behind the trees, Mara stood in the living room with her arms wrapped around herself. The house felt colder than usual, like a storm was gathering inside the walls. Finally, she heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. Mara moved slowly to the window. Elias stepped out of the car, but he wasn't alone. He walked to the back seat and carefully lifted something large, wrapped in a long, dark sheet. His movements were slow and gentle, almost loving. The shape he carried was stiff, too still, too heavy to be a person on their own. Mara's breath hitched. He wasn't bringing a guest. He was carrying a body. Her heart pounded as Elias brought the covered figure toward the porch. For one terrifying moment, she wondered if he had done something horrible, something unforgivable. She stepped back from the door, fear locking her in place. The door creaked open. Elias stepped in, holding the covered form in his arms like someone carrying a bride across the threshold. "Mara," he said softly, closed the door. His voice wasn't cold this time. It was calm, too calm. Mara obeyed, her hands shaking. She couldn't take her eyes off the shape covered in the cloth. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. "Elias," she whispered, "what is that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked down the hall toward the spare room. Mara followed at a distance, her legs trembling with every step. Inside the room, he laid the body gently on the bed they had made the night before. He pulled the sheet back, revealing a face. Mara gasped and covered her mouth. It wasn't a real person. It was a doll. No, not a doll. It was far too realistic for that. The skin looked pale, but human. The eyelashes were long and dark. The hair was thick, brushed neatly over her shoulders. The lips were shaped softly, as if frozen right before speaking. It looked like a lifeless woman, a corpse crafted with frightening detail. "She's beautiful," Elias murmured. Mara's throat tightened. What is this?" He touched the doll's cheek with the back of his fingers, smiling faintly. A smile she hadn't seen in years. "This," he said with quiet pride, "is Leora." Mara stared at him, stunned. "Leora?" "Yes." He brushed the doll's hair like it was the most delicate thing in the world. "My other wife." Mara felt like the room spun. "You're what?" "Elias, what you saying?" He didn't answer her. His full attention was on the lifeless woman lying on the bed. He held the doll's cold hand as if it were warm and living. "We have to welcome her," he said softly. "She's been waiting a long time." Mara backed away a step. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She felt confusion, anger, fear. emotions crashing into each other inside her chest. "Elias, she's not real," Mara whispered, her voice cracking. "She's a doll. A figure. Why would you call her?" "She is real to me," he said sharply, looking up at her with eyes she barely recognized. The words hit her like a blow. He returned his gaze to Leora, stroking her hair. "I've worked on her for so long. Every detail, every feature." Mara felt sick. She had known Elias was grieving, but this was something else. Something deeper, darker. He leaned down and whispered to the doll as if sharing a secret. Mara couldn't hear the words, but the intimacy of it made her stomach twist. She felt like she was intruding on a moment meant for two people, except one of them wasn't alive. "Elias," she tried again, her voice trembling, "please stop. This isn't healthy. This isn't." He ignored her. He lifted the doll into a sitting position, adjusting her hair, smoothing her dress. He touched her hand again, smiling as if she responded to him. Mara backed up to the doorway, her breath shaking. He didn't see the doll as an object. He didn't see it as a creation. He saw it as alive, as someone who wasn't her. Mara clutched the doorframe, tears burning behind her eyes as a terrible truth settled over her. She wasn't losing Elias to another woman. She was losing him to a fantasy he built with his own hands. Elena slowly begins to realize that something is terribly wrong with the new wife Daniel has brought home. The woman never eats, never sleeps, never shifts unless Daniel touches her, as if she exists in a state of frozen perfection. Her stillness is unnatural, so absolute that it feels like a shadow pretending to be human. Daniel, however, treats her with delicate devotion, brushing her hair, adjusting her clothes, speaking to her with a gentleness Elena hasn't seen in years. He protects the new wife from Elena's questions, becoming defensive and irritable whenever Elena expresses discomfort. The house, once warm, begins to feel colder, heavier, filled with an invisible presence watching quietly from the corners. At night, Elena sometimes hears faint sounds, like the soft creak of weight shifting, but when she looks, the woman is seated exactly where she left her. Until one night, Elena sees it with her own eyes. The woman's head, once angled slightly downward, is now turned fully toward the door, eyes half open as though she is silently studying Elena. In that moment, terror crawls through her veins. She cannot breathe. She cannot move. And she cannot deny anymore that something inside this house is deeply, chillingly off. When Elena tries to confide in Daniel, he shatters with anger and heartbreak, insisting that the woman isn't dangerous and just needs understanding. His voice trembles with the kind of grief that clings to the dead, refusing to let go, and Elena feels herself pushed further away from him with every passing day. She questions her sanity, wondering if she's jealous of a corpse, if she's losing her husband to a memory she can never compete with. Determined to uncover the truth, she starts digging through old journals, photographs, fragments of the past Daniel tried to bury. Little by little, the dark connection reveals itself. Daniel and this woman shared a bond forged in pain, guilt, and unfinished promises. Something about her death was not peaceful. Something unresolved clung to her and to Daniel. And whatever he brought home in her place, whatever sits silently in their living room wrapped in a dead woman's face, is not simply the body of someone he loved. It is something that should never have returned. Mara couldn't ignore the strange feeling twisting in her chest anymore. One quiet afternoon, while Elias was out, she walked toward his workshop, the room he always kept locked, the room he said she didn't need to enter. Her hand shook as she pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint smell of old paint and metal. Papers covered every surface, sketches of a woman's face drawn again and again, each one more detailed than the last. Mara recognized the features instantly. It was Leora, the lifeless woman he brought home. Her heart pounded as she flipped through his journals. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting, memories, regrets, unfinished apologies. One entry told the story of a woman Elias knew before their marriage, a woman he had loved deeply, a woman who walked out of his life without warning. Mara found more drawings. Leora smiling, Leora crying, Leora sleeping. And then she found the most painful discovery of all, an old note written before their tragedy, where Elias had suggested the name they should give their unborn child. Leora, the baby Mara had carried, the baby they lost, was meant to carry the name of another woman he had loved first. It felt like her heart cracked open. A sharp, lonely ache spread through her as she realized she had never truly known her husband's wounds. As Mara sank to the floor, the weight of Elias's secrets crashed over her. She felt betrayed, hollow, and lost. All these years she thought they were grieving the same child, the same future. But Elias had been carrying something else, something heavier, something twisted by guilt and longing. The doll wasn't just a sick creation. It was a symbol of everything he never healed, everything he never told her. A desperate attempt to bring back the pieces of his past, to rewrite the pain that had shaped him long before Mara entered his life. Hot tears blurred her vision as she pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe, trying to understand how love could hide so many sharp edges. Just then, she heard a soft whisper float down the hallway, a voice she knew too well. "Elias, now our family is complete," he murmured with a trembling joy that chilled her to the bone. Mara froze, knowing those words weren't meant for her. He was whispering to the doll, to Leora. And in that moment, Mara understood the truth she feared most. She was standing inside a home built not on love, but on the broken memory of another woman. The days that followed felt heavier than anything Mara had ever carried. Elias spent nearly every waking moment beside the doll, speaking softly to it, brushing its cold hair, and sitting in silence as if waiting for it to breathe. Mara tried to approach him gently at first, hoping she could reach whatever piece of him was still real, still hers. But every time she tried to talk, his eyes drifted back to Leora, filled with a strange light she hadn't seen in years. When she told him she was worried, Elias grew tense and suspicious, as if she was trying to take away the only thing holding him together. His hands shook, and his voice cracked with fear instead of anger. Mara felt the sting of being replaced, not by a living woman, but by a quiet reminder of all the love Elias had kept hidden in the corners of his heart. She found herself watching him from a distance, afraid not because he was violent, but because he was slipping deeper into a world where she no longer existed. One desperate afternoon, Mara couldn't take it anymore. She walked into the room where Leora lay, frozen in her lifeless beauty, and tried to lift the doll from the bed. Her hands trembled as she whispered to herself, begging silently for strength. But before she could move it, Elias appeared in the doorway. His face crumpled as if she had stabbed him. He rushed forward, pulling the doll into his arms and collapsing beside it. His sobs filled the room, broken, raw, painful. "I can't lose her again," he cried repeatedly, rocking the lifeless body like a child. Mara stood frozen, her heart splitting open as she watched the man she once loved fall apart in front of her. She wanted to comfort him, to remind him that she was still there, still trying. But she also felt a deep, aching truth growing inside her. She couldn't spend her life living in the shadow of another woman's ghost. That moment left her torn between compassion and self-survival, unsure of how much more her heart could endure. Mara knew she couldn't face this alone anymore. One morning, after another night of hearing Elias whisper to the doll instead of sleeping beside her, she drove to meet his estranged sister, Alina, a woman Elias rarely spoke about. Alina listened quietly as Mara explained everything. The doll, the strange behavior, the old sketches, the crying, the way Elias held on to the past like a lifeline. When Mara finally broke down, Alina sighed and revealed a truth that felt even heavier. Leora had been Elias's first love, a woman he adored in a way that shaped his entire youth. But she left him for someone else, leaving Elias shattered and alone. He buried the pain, locked it deep inside him, and promised himself never to feel that kind of hurt again. But when Mara and Elias lost their baby, the wound he had hidden reopened. The grief twisted together with his old heartbreak until he could no longer tell past from present. Mara listened in stunned silence, realizing Elias's love for her had always been tangled with the memory of someone he never truly let go. Driving home, she felt a new kind of exhaustion, one made from heartbreak, empathy, and a painful clarity about the man she married. That night, with her hands shaking and her heart heavy, Mara sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to Elias. She poured out everything she had held inside for years: the pain of losing their child, the feeling of living in a house full of ghosts, the heartbreak of watching him choose the dead over the living. She told him she still loved him, but she could no longer compete with a memory that wasn't hers. She begged him to choose life, to choose healing, to choose her. And she wrote the words she never imagined writing: that she would leave him unless he sought help. Her suitcase was small, just enough clothes to last a few days, but it felt impossibly heavy as she placed it by the door. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the home they once built together, wondering if love, real love, could survive something this broken. She didn't want to abandon him. She still hoped he would fight for their life together. But for the first time, Mara understood she had to fight for herself too. The night Mara placed her suitcase by the door, the sky outside broke open with a wild storm. Rain slammed against the windows, and thunder shook the old house as if the earth itself knew something was falling apart. Elias found her letter on the kitchen table. Mara heard the soft rustle of paper, then nothing, just a long, heavy silence that made her chest tighten. When he finally stepped into the hallway, he looked like a man who had been struck in the heart. His hands trembled as he held the letter, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. He walked through the house like someone searching for air, stumbling past the furniture, past the memories, past the woman he had pushed aside. When he saw the suitcase by the door, something inside him cracked. His breath hitched, and a raw, broken sound escaped his throat. He realized, maybe for the first time, that he had pushed Mara to the very edge. That the lifeless doll he clung to could never love him back, never heal him, never save him. The storm outside crashed louder, but nothing was as loud as the silence growing between them. Elias moved through the house in panic, tears streaking down his face. He entered the room where Leora's doll lay, untouched and still. His entire body shook as he approached it, the storm's lightning flashing across his face. He whispered apologies, some to Mara, some to the doll, some to the past he never let go of. Then something shattered inside him, something deep and painful. With a cry that came from a place of years-old grief, Elias grabbed the doll and hurled it to the floor. The sound of it breaking against the wood echoed through the entire house. He sank to his knees, smashing it again and again, his sobs mixing with the storm. It wasn't rage, it was release. Every strike was a goodbye he had never allowed himself to say. When the last piece fell still, Elias collapsed beside it, his body shaking, his hands bleeding slightly from the sharp edges. And in that moment, surrounded by broken pieces of the woman he couldn't let go, he finally saw what was real. The only person who had stayed, the only person still fighting for him, was the one he had pushed away. But he didn't know if it was too late. When Mara stepped back into the room, she found Elias collapsed on the floor beside the broken pieces of the doll. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and his hands were still trembling. The storm outside had calmed, leaving only a soft rumble of thunder, like the earth was sighing after holding its breath too long. Mara's heart ached at the sight of him, not with anger, but with a deep, tired sadness. She didn't rush to him, but she didn't turn away either. She stood there for a moment, taking in the man she once knew, the man she still cared for beneath all the brokenness. Slowly, she walked toward him and placed a gentle hand on his back. Elias flinched at first, then leaned in her touch, his whole body collapsing into a quiet, desperate need. He whispered that he was sorry, that he didn't know how far he had fallen, that he never meant to lose her. Mara listened, her eyes filled with tears, knowing an apology couldn't erase the damage. But it was the first honest thing he had offered in a long time. By morning, the air felt different, still sad, still heavy, but clearer in a way that felt almost new. Elias sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and pale, but more present than he had been in months. His voice was shaky when he said he would get help, real help. Not just promises, not just silence, therapy, treatment, whatever it took to rebuild what he had broken inside himself. Mara nodded, not because everything was forgiven, but because she saw a small piece of hope fighting to stay alive. She told him she would support him, but only if he fought for his own healing too. She would not carry all the weight anymore. Elias agreed, reaching for her hand with a gentleness she hadn't felt in years. The past still sat between them, full of scars and painful memories, but the future no longer felt impossible. It felt fragile like glass, something that could break again, but also something worth protecting. Months passed, and the house slowly changed in ways Mara never expected. The heavy silence that once frightened her now felt gentler, almost peaceful. The rooms no longer echoed with tension or secrets. Elias kept his promise. He went to therapy every week, sometimes returning quiet and shaken, other times a little lighter. He wasn't healed, not fully, but he was trying a way Mara had never seen before. And while she supported him, she also began rebuilding herself. She spent mornings walking through the old garden, afternoons journaling, evenings rediscovering who she was outside of grief. The house, once filled with unspoken pain, now felt like a place where both of them were learning how to breathe again. There were still moments when Elias drifted, when the past tugged at him like a shadow, but he always came back. Not to the ghost he once chased, but to the life he still had. One soft morning, under a pale sky, Mara and Elias visited the small grave where their unborn child rested. It was the first time they had gone together. Mara held a simple white flower, and Elias carried a quiet sorrow that felt honest instead of hidden. They stood side by side without speaking, letting the silence wrap around them like a fragile kind of comfort. For the first time, they faced their shared loss together. No walls, no dolls, no ghosts. Just two people who had hurt, loved, broken, and somehow survived. As they walked back home, Mara felt a sense of hope. Not the bright, easy kind, but a quiet one shaped by everything they had endured. She knew some wounds would never fully fade, and some memories would always sting. But she also knew that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning how to build something new with the pieces left behind. And in that old house, with its tired walls and soft morning light, Mara finally believed that some things, even after being shattered, could still be rebuilt into something honest, gentle, and real.